Welcome to On Assignment, a podcast for men who refuse to sit on the sidelines. This is for men who want to step up, lean in, and pursue God's calling with courage and character. Each episode, we tackle faith, leadership, family, and health, equipping you to become a stronger man, body, soul, and spirit. On Assignment is brought to you by Mobilized Man, where our mission is to equip and mobilize men as kingdom assets. And kingdom assets are men who actively and intentionally pursue the assignment of God on their lives. My name is John Harvey, and I'm here with my co-host, Will Drlik. And tonight, we're going to discuss the topic of facing and resolving conflict. Facing and resolving conflict. Most men hate conflict, to be honest. We'd rather just kind of brush it under the rug. We'd rather just kind of absorb it, distract ourselves, do something different, or disconnect, and distance ourselves from the conflict. We'd do almost anything other than try to resolve it. And the good news is that Jesus has a better way for us, and we're going to talk about that tonight. But Will and I are thinking that this is a pretty good topic because every relationship that you're a part of, there's room for conflict. And whether it's a marriage relationship, a friendship, a business partner, or a work relationship, coworker, whatever it is, every relationship has room for conflict. And so if most men hate resolving conflict, then that means that most relationships aren't really being allowed to develop and mature to the point that they should be because they're being cut off too early or the growth is stunted because conflict is never resolved. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. And I hope that for you, our listeners out there, that this is a topic that will help you like it helped me. I remember going through my 20s, my 30s, and into my 40s even, and really not having a good approach to resolving conflict. And because of that, there were so often times where I didn't want to address conflict because it just always felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And early on, I just avoided it completely. But then I realized that if I was going to be successful in marriage, if I was going to be successful in business and as a father and in these different areas, I had to address conflict. So how do you face conflict in a godly way? And so we're going to start, though, by asking a couple of questions. And the first question we're going to ask tonight is why do so many men avoid addressing conflict directly? What do you think, Will?
Man, we are creatures of comfort sometimes. And so I think our flesh craves being comfortable, and we often choose the path of least resistance. And at that point, when that conflict happens, the path of least resistance is moving on, but that actually leads to extreme resistance. And so I think it's just the fear. It's not comfortable, insecurity. It takes courage to do that. Like you have to exercise those muscles. And I think so many times, like I'm guilty of like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And then also for me, it's like an uncertainty in myself sometimes where it's like, I'm not certain if I should be offended about this. And so I'm just going to move on until it's too late to confront this. And so I know I'm very guilty of that, but that's not the right move.
Yeah. A lot of times we make the wrong decision when it comes to that initial confrontation with an offense when there's conflict. And a lot of it is just because we lack understanding. That was like my case. I didn't know how to approach it. I felt like, I wanted to have a pathway that I could follow or a systematic approach to it so that I could know how to lead a conversation in resolving the conflict. But I always felt like it was like this freestyle conversation And if someone was more emotional in their response, then I would kind of be like, well, I don't want to get all fired up about this, and kind of pull back. Or, I just never felt I felt inept at resolving conflict. And this is
Yeah.
early on when I was just very young. And so I would just avoid it. I didn't want the hassle of it. I didn't want to, the difficulty of it. I just thought, man, I'll just avoid the conflict and not even deal with it, and then keep moving forward. And so many
Yeah.
guys feel that way. They feel like I'll avoid it. I won't even address it, and we'll just keep moving forward. But we have to ask ourselves, what happens to us when we just absorb it? What happens when we decide not to resolve conflict? What's actually happening to us, and what's happening to that relationship when we do that? And I feel like that's a great question to ask, because the results of avoiding conflict are not good in the life of a man.
Yeah.
How do you feel? How do you truly feel deep inside of yourself when you take a step back and you think about the fact that I just totally avoided resolving a conflict that should have been addressed? You don't,
Yeah. You feel cowardly.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. You're like,
cowardly.
I gave in to fear. I let
Yeah,
fear, every time that I haven't stepped into conflict, I feel like discouraged, cowardly. It's like kind of a little like feel some shame there, because it's like going against what Jesus is talking about today, as we're going to go through in Matthew 18:15. It's like there's a little bit of shame there that is like, why did I let fear like control me and steer me away from this? And why did fear of man get in the way of this relationship? I feel shame in that area when you let fear kind of guide you into not like facing this to help build your relationship, because I think at the end of this, your relationship, it should be stronger after going
mhm,
through a conflict and getting through it, and you should be in a better space and have more awareness of kind of where you fall in that relationship, whether that's with your marriage or your coworker. It's a strengthening tool of
yeah.
facing conflict. But I mean, I just like all of us, I mean, I wish that I faced conflict like more. It's like anytime that I haven't, or I've avoided it, I've regretted it.
We have to understand that we're not. It's something that you grow in. It's something that you need to just start working to do, and you'll get better with it over time. And
Hmm.
so oftentimes when we feel like we're not going to do something well, we decide not to do it at all. And you got to understand that it's a very challenging situation, but you have to have the courage to step into it, because if you don't, and you don't face it, you don't try to resolve it, and you just absorb it, that there's actually a lot that's going on the inside of you that happens because of that. And it can lead to things such as you begin to resent the other person because of that offense and that conflict, even though you never created an opportunity for you guys to be able to resolve it. And you're resenting them for something that you never even gave a chance to get healed up or dealt with. And so that
Yeah.
resentment piece it'll definitely lead to that relationship not growing. And it could even lead to that relationship breaking down and there being complete division between the two of you. And that could be with a
Yeah.
spouse. That could
It's a
be with,
wedge.
yeah,
It's a
there you
wedge
go.
for sure.
Yeah. And so there's that resentment piece. There's also, I love what you were saying, because when you step into resolve conflict and you're going to address it, you're practicing, or you're working an emotional muscle. There's a part of your soul that you are actually working that gets stronger and stronger. And so if you don't address the conflict, you have that reverse effect where you actually experience this emotional atrophy to where you get weaker and weaker. And then deep inside, you know that you're not the man that you want to be. And so you might be putting on these facades, but yet you don't have any relationship in your life that's gone any deeper than a foot deep, because every time conflict comes up, you just completely distance yourself. And so you become emotionally atrophied in that place of avoiding conflict. And so there's definitely a negative impact that just sweeping it under the rug, distancing yourself or absorbing it has on your personal life. And I just want to encourage our listeners out there that the fact that you have conflict in your relationships doesn't mean that that's a failure in the relationship. It's just a test of that relationship. It's actually a part of developing relationships and growing relationships is to deal with conflict. And there's so much value in the relationships we have, and those relationships gain value with time. As those relationships have time to mature and to grow, and they go through conflict after conflict, there's a profound nature to that relationship to where it gets deeper and deeper, and it gets better and better. And that maturing process is amazing, but you'll never experience that if you don't allow yourself to step into facing the conflict and dealing with it. And so I want you guys to understand that don't allow the fact that there's conflict to cause you to think that the relationship's a failure. It's just a test. It's just a test of maturity. It's just a test of you being able to move forward in future engagements where you can deal with difficult things without being offended, because you've already passed that test. And then when future conflicts do arise, you know how to resolve it more effectively and more maturely. And it just gets better and better. And so let our marriages, our friendships, our different relationships grow, mature, and deepen through the process of handling conflict. And we want to take a look at what Jesus tells us in Scripture in order, what's the best way to do that? How do we actually begin to take what Jesus says and apply it to our lives? And so we're going to look today at Matthew chapter 18 and verse 15. And Will, you've got that available to read there?
Yep. So Matthew 18:15, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother.
There you go. So Jesus very clearly points out that if you're offended, if there's a conflict between you and a brother or you and another person, that it's important that you deal with it, that you don't distance yourself, that you don't just absorb it. And I want to clarify here, though, we are talking about relational conflict. We're not talking about a business contractual conflict. We're not talking about a dangerous conflict. We're talking about a relational conflict between you and someone that you're in relationship with. All right. And so Jesus lays out real clearly here how we should approach that conflict. And so the first kind of thing that we see is that um, if your brother sins against you, if there's this initiation of conflict, that he says, go and tell him. All right. So go and tell him. That takes an initiative on your part to have some personal courage to actually step into this and say, all right, this guy sinned against me. I'm offended. He may or may not know it, but I need to go and I need to tell him about it. And so that's kind of this initial thought that Jesus gives us is that it needs to be addressed. And I think we've been kind of hitting that on the head pretty good here, but it takes courage to do that. It takes actually us saying, I feel like that this is at the point where I need to address it. And we talked a little bit about trigger points before the podcast. We were talking about, okay, so at what point should we actually consider something an offense that is worth resolving? If somebody drops the F-bomb around me and and I'm offended, do I have to go and tell that person, hey, you sinned against me, you offended me, and then try and resolve that? Or if someone tells you that they watched um, a movie, or they listen to some band that you kind of feel like is off, it's not something that you would actually watch or something that you would listen to because that's not within the standards that you have for your own life. Is that an offense that is something that you would pursue and try and resolve that with that brother or that person? And so at what point do we begin to establish trigger points that would allow us to know, okay, I have to actually go and handle this? And so what are your thoughts on that, Will? What are some of those trigger points that a guy could establish in his life that would say, okay, I need to address this? And then maybe there's other offenses where it's like, you know what, that doesn't really offend me. I'm not going to have to, I don't have to deal with this.
I think you definitely need to have a like humble approach to this and take a time to figure out, like, why am I offended about this? And like I think the why matters and the offense matters, and like I think you should go to yourself and through prayer first, like have a self-reflection moment and be like, and go to Jesus about it too. It's like, Jesus, why does this offend me?
Right.
And I think in that moment, you'll also use discernment with help of the Holy Spirit to kind of guide yourself through this. But it might just be like what you're talking about. It might just be a maturity thing. It's like, maybe I need to mature in some areas. Maybe this shouldn't offend me. Maybe I am being judgmental, and kind of have a good, because in these moments with relationships, it's a two-way street. And so we want to make sure that we're not pointing our finger. We're growing just as much as we're wanting our brother to grow.
Yeah. Great
and
point.
So I think if we approach it from that angle and like have that humble self-reflection first, and we kind of wrestle through it, and it still offends us and it makes sense. It's like, okay, this goes against scripture, this goes against my morals, or it's just like there's some really hard cut lines where it's like I should go to that person, and then like the examples that you gave, maybe you need some maturing to do in some areas. So I can't remember what we spoke about earlier, if you have anything better to add to that, but I think it's that self-reflection piece is huge.
Yeah, it's really important because every one of us is different. We're at a different place in our spiritual maturity. We're at a different place in our maybe our age, how old we are, and how much water we have under the bridge in life. And so this different things are going to hit different guys differently. And so obviously, but it's like, for me, it's like that self-reflection piece helps you discern, was this a sin against me? Like Jesus says, if a brother sins against you. And so for me, it's like, I can be around guys who drop F-bombs every other word and not have I don't have a single bit of offense about that. It doesn't bother me at all. I can have guys listening to whatever kind of music and it doesn't offend me. Guys are going to do what guys are going to do. It just gives me an indicator of where they're at in their life. It doesn't mean that I have to be offended by the way they act or by the way that they live their lives. And so I really try and be as unoffendable as possible when it comes to how people present themselves, how they live, how they act. And so, the points of offense come into where there is a sin against me, to where it's like, hey, brother, you know what? You said you were going to do this, but you did the exact opposite. I need to address this because that you lied to me. Or you didn't keep your word, or, hey, you know what? There's an issue here because we talked about you doing this a certain way, and it didn't turn out the way that you said that it would, and then you didn't even try to resolve that at all. And so there's these different things with our wives. Even it's like, you know what, boy, there's lots of good examples there in our
Careful. Careful
our
now.
marriages. It's just kind of like, if I use one, people will be like, oh yeah, okay, that must have happened last night, John. But but those offenses that come into where it's like, man, she totally took what I said out of context, and then she blew up at me and got real emotional, and then so it's like, what point do we have to address these things and say, this is actually a sin that was a sin against me, and I need to resolve this. This is actually an offense that that is more than just somebody did something offensive. It's like, I'm offended by this and it's impacted me, and I need to address this. And so there's it's going to depend on who you are, how you're wired, and how mature you are. And Paul addresses this in Corinthians. And at the time, there was the new believers. They were dealing with people coming into the church, and they would eat together, and sometimes they would go, and they'd go to the meat market to get meat, and they would bring that meat home, and they would cook up that meat, and they would want to serve that meat to the believers. And there was this understanding that meat had actually been part of a pagan temple sacrifice. And so there was believers who were getting offended because of the fact that the meat came from a pagan temple, and that their brother would actually serve them that meat. And there was this offense that was happening among the brothers in the church um, because of the fact that they were offended that the meat came from a pagan temple. And Paul's kind of like, hey, you know what? Yeah, I get it, but it's just meat. In the long run, it's just meat. You're going to cook it, you're going to eat it, you're going to digest it, and then your body's going to do with it what it will. It doesn't mean that you're ingesting a demonic type of protein. It's just meat.
Mhm.
And so be careful about what you allow to offend you, because it's not a big,
Mhm.
it's not an issue, because it's just meat. Now, he said at the same time, he said, if you're dealing with an immature brother who is very offended by that, and you know that, well, then don't serve them meat from a pagan temple when they come over to your place, because you don't want to
Mhm.
put them in a position to where you're offending them based upon their immaturity or their lack of understanding or whatever it is. And so, you know, he's talking about that place of self-reflection that you said. It's like, we have to discern, what is it that I need to be offended by, and what is it that I shouldn't be? Because ultimately, as we mature, the more we mature as men and believers, the more unoffendable we need to become. Right.
Yeah.
And so at the same time, there's certain things that should offend us that we can become apathetic to and neutral on, when it's like, no, that should absolutely offend you. And
Mhm.
and so it's a process of discernment. And so if you feel like there's something that was done to you, said to you, or someone acted against you in, that you are going to continue to remember that next day, and that next day after that, and it's going to be something that's going to stay in your heart whenever you think about that person, that's a good indicator that you need to address that conflict. Otherwise, it will destroy
Mhm.
the relationship. And so sometimes we talked about this at the beginning of the podcast. It's like, we want to just get right back into the flow and be distracted and forget about it. We don't address it, especially with our wives. And so what happens is that we carry that offense, and then it comes up later, and it's even bigger and worse than it was the time before, because we never addressed it. And so let's be men who take the time to consider, should I address this or not? And if I should, then let's be courageous and make that phone call or send that text message and say, hey, let's get together. I need to talk with you about something. When can we connect? And
Yeah.
I feel like that's the first step in what Jesus is talking about. And what I love is the last part of that verse. is that it says that if he listens to you, you have gained your brother. The whole goal in what Jesus is saying here is to restore that relationship, to see that restoration happen, to where it's like, man, we're restoring our that relationship, and that relationship can grow from there. We're not trying to just address this and try and resolve the conflict by proving that we're right, or by having kind of the advantage in an argument and trying to say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, to point the finger and put the blame on the other person. The whole goal here should be to say, I'm going to actually take that step of courage and say, we need to meet face to face, and the whole goal of that meeting is for restoration. And that's what
Yeah.
Jesus is saying here. And then Jesus gives guidelines after verse 15 in verses 16 and 17. If the brother doesn't listen to you, then there's other alternatives that you can do in order to help resolve that conflict. But today we're going to focus on the process that Jesus kind of lays out for us as men in resolving conflict. And so, what are some of the things that that process requires from us? I think we've already talked about courage. It takes the courage to step out and say, man, we need to get together, and I need to talk with you about something. What else does
Takes
it
setting
take?
time, prioritizing
Taking time.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, to make that meeting. One thing that while you're talking came to me was, if we're not addressing these conflicts, especially in like long-term relationships like marriage or maybe long-term coworkers, is
Yeah.
you're really stacking offenses. If you're not addressing the issue, or these people aren't aware of the issue, chances are they probably won't fix the issue, and the issue may keep happening, and you're just stacking offenses, making it way
Yeah.
worse, way harder. You're basically building a wall between you and that person. And so I just think, like, if we handle it earlier than later, we don't allow those offenses to stack, and
Yeah.
that's where you get those blow ups in relationships, is when those offenses are stacked up, and you're like, whoa, this came out of nowhere, when really, I mean, if you would have talked about it 10 offenses ago, and you would have nipped it right then and there, or addressed it, they would be aware of the issue, and therefore there wouldn't be that big blow up. So I think, especially in marriages, when if you guys are having like these big blow up arguments, or these things kind of just happen out of nowhere and they seem huge, it's like you should take a look and see, like, am I avoiding conflict, and is that leading us into these
Mm,
big huge conflicts? Because I don't
that's
know, when
really
you're
wise.
talking, I was like, man, it's like, when we avoid conflict, we're really just stacking these things up. And then, and I, you were talking about marriage, and I was like, why do couples have those big blow up moments? And I think anytime that, like, we have large conflict in our marriage, it's because there was a something that got swept under the rug, or we were saying we were too busy to handle it right
Hmm.
now, and I'm going to do it later. It's laziness. It's because those offenses were stacked up, and it just causes a way bigger issue than just handling it off the get-go. But I mean, I get it. It's never
Yep.
convenient.
Right. Yeah.
You're always stretched for time, especially in marriage. You got kids going on. It's like there's just a lot of factors to it. But as
Totally.
men, stepping into that conflict is huge. Sorry, I don't know if I
No,
got off track there.
it's
I
good.
can't
No,
remember
it's
what.
good. It also shows the value that you place in the relationship. You know,
Yeah.
it's really a piece of it's an interesting mindset when we value something, we're willing to do whatever it takes to maintain that, to help keep it healthy and to help it grow. And when we take something for granted, then it that mindset tends to lead towards neglect and just trying to hope that things go the long haul, and you're not really intentional or purposeful in your approach. And you know, um, it's like if you don't maintain your vehicle, and you don't you start seeing indicators that some type of maintenance needs to be done, and you don't change the oil or you don't check the oil levels, and then you let that thing just burn all of its oil and then it's out of oil, you're going to ruin that vehicle, the motor. And so it's the same in life with relationships, to where, if you value your friendships, if you value your wife, if you value the coworker that you work with, and you want to have a successful relationship, it demands time. It
Yeah.
demands your attention. And so you have to invest time into that. And so many times I was guilty of putting my priorities in things other than in those relationships. I always had a lot to do. There was always a lot for me to get done for work, in life in general. And it was like, man, I don't have time to deal with this right now. I just got to keep moving forward and hope it works out. Well, I'm automatically showing the amount of value that I put on that relationship, because I'm putting value in everything else besides that relationship at that point. And so to be someone who says, you know what, I prioritize my marriage, I prioritize my friendships, and I'm going to actually take the time to discuss this and handle it. And it might take 15 minutes, it might take a couple hours, but it's going to take an effort for you to connect. And so understanding that. But what happens though is that you see the fruit and the results of that investment of your time and energy immediately. You can resolve. It's like the pulling out of a giant, splinter out of your hand. And, you can keep working with that, and yeah, it'll fester and but it just, long term, it's just not good for you to keep that in your hand. But when you pull it out, it's like immediately you start the healing process and you're able to get back to what you were doing, instead of having to work with that wound. And that, a splinter is not a wound, but you know what you get the analogy there, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but giving it the time it needs, actually addressing it, is so important. And um, to be able to say that, man, I want this relationship to go the distance, requires us to give it the attention that it needs. And so being aware of
Yeah.
that, taking the time to reflect, is this the time for
Yeah,
me to do this?
that's what I was just like, you you actually have to care. And it
Yeah.
sounds so simple and like, yeah, duh. But what's the word? Is it apathy? Is that apathetic? People that don't
Yeah.
care? Is that the right
Yeah.
word?
Yep.
I think like
That's right.
as men, we've come to think that like apathy and not caring is manly or tough, and it's exactly the opposite. It's like
Mm,
you actually have to share, or you actually have to
right.
care in this relationship. And so it's like, to show tender love and care to something, we do that for our vehicles or our cars or our whatever our hobbies
Tools.
are, our hunting, yeah, our
Yeah.
tools, hunting equipment. So we give those things TLC, but the things that we actually need to, like relationships, we're apathetic towards those things, and we think it's cool not to care, or it's dumb to care and
Yeah.
not manly. It's like, no, we need to shift that mindset. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
talking
Uh,
about it is huge.
yes, it's so important. And so it's going to require time. Like you said, it's going to require us to make the decision to address it. And that just in and of itself requires some humility, to walk humbly and say, you know what, something's going on here that I'm offended by, and there's some conflict here. We need to resolve this. And that takes a humble man to do that. It takes some humility. It takes some vision for that relationship, saying, hey, I have a clear vision. I want this relationship to prosper and to be healthy and solid. And so those are all elements that are required of a man when it comes to resolving conflict. It requires courage. It requires time. It requires clear vision, humility. And so all of those are important attributes that we want developed in our life anyway. And so the actual process of resolving conflict is helping us become the men that we need to be. And so I hope our listeners can understand that when we run from that resolving of the conflict, that not only are we causing that relationship to suffer, but we are hurting ourselves at the same time, and we are not becoming the men that we're supposed to be. And inside, there's an understanding of that. And when we feel like we've been cowardly, or we have shame over our responses or lack of response, when we feel like we're avoiding something that's important, then truly we're not walking in integrity. We have a presentation, we have masks that we put on that cause us to look and appear and present ourselves a certain way, but inside we know different. And that breakdown of integrity causes us to live broken lives, and we're not whole. And so there's a whole there's so many things that this impacts in our personal life. And so Jesus gives us a model to follow when he says, go to the brother, tell him what's going on face to face, and then work to restore your relationship with your brother. And so we're gonna move into talking about a model or a framework for resolving conflict that's helped me tremendously in my personal life, that I learned 3 years ago when I started working with Mountain Gateway doing their wilderness intensives. This is a subject that we talk about when we're actually out in the Bob Marshall Wilderness with our groups that we take out, because so many people want to do this well, but don't feel like they have any kind of a framework in which to do it in. And so I thought it'd be great for us to talk about this framework for how we can constructively approach conflict and resolve it. And it's an acronym that we're going to use tonight, and it's called V.O.E.M.P, which is V.O.E.M.P. And so Jesus gives us he gives us the why, so that we can gain a brother, so that we can restore the relationship. This framework is kind of the how do we do that? How do we approach this restoration process of restoring our relationship and resolving conflict? And it's called V.O.E.M.P. All right, so we're going to break down V.O.E.M.P, and we're going to start with the V. The V in V.O.E.M.P is to actually, first of all, we want to come together face to face, and we want to have an honest conversation with each other. All right, and so in the context of that conversation, if you initiate that conversation and say, hey, let's get together, I need to talk with you about a couple things. When you start that conversation off, I would coach you to frame that conversation with the person so they know why you've asked them to meet. And you could say something like, hey, I really want to address this, whatever that conflict was, because I was really offended by that, and I really want to make sure that I can address that with you so that we can move forward without this conflict bringing a wedge into our relationship. All right. So you can frame the conversation clearly with your wife or with the person you're talking with, so that they're not kind of blindsided by the fact that you're going to be talking about some emotional things, perhaps, that you're going to be talking about what the subject is you'd like to discuss. And so you're framing that conversation, and then you're starting with an approach in this framework with the V, which means to actually let each of you voice your the way that conflict has impacted you. All right. So you're going to allow each person, you're going to allow the other person and yourself to voice your viewpoint at what the conflict is and how it impacted you. And you're going to allow that to happen without interrupting each other. So Will and I have a dispute. Something comes up in the process of working together on this podcast. I'm upset with Will because he said he was going to be available to record at such and such a time. I get all set up. I carve out that time in my calendar, and then Will doesn't show up, and then it kind of blows up that week's recording, and so I've got an offense with Will. This hasn't happened yet, but let's just put this out there. So I say, hey, Will, we need to talk. We get together. And so at that point, then it's important for me to be able to say, hey, this is what happened. This is how I feel. And this is how it's impacted me. And I'm not trying to, in this point of using the V, which is our voice, I'm not trying to point the finger and point the blame at Will. I'm trying to express how I feel in it and how that the conflict has impacted me. And so, and then when Will is talking, I'm not trying to interrupt him and interject, well, I didn't actually say that, or this is what I actually meant, or I'm just trying to let him voice his take on the whole situation. Right? Does that make sense? As far as like, is that clearly stated on the actual part of recognizing the other? You're really recognizing the other person's perspective, and you're not necessarily agreeing with it. You're not necessarily saying, "Hey, I agree with that," or "Yeah, you're spot on." You're just being able to hear them out, so that each of you have an opportunity to use your voice and share your perspective. And so, it also acknowledges, hey, I see that this really mattered to you. This was something that was really, uh, this really affected you. And so I can really see that when we're talking with each other. And so, in that time, a verse that comes to mind is James 1:19, where he says, I want you to be slow to anger. No, he says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And so in this part of the conversation, you got to really kind of be using the brake pedal on your emotions and being like slow to anger. Just don't let yourself get angry during this part of the conversation. Be slow to speak and quick to listen. And so that's really a part of this framework that's really can be challenging for guys. And most of us don't even get to this point where we actually allow each other to kind of vocalize, use our voice to express our perspective. All right. Any questions on that part of it? Or
No,
any
I
input?
think the framework for the conversation is really big, and how you deliver that should, like, I don't want to say disengage, but like disarm the if there's any hostility or any kind of heat in the moment, like the way that you deliver the way that you're framing the conversation should kind of disarm whatever, if there was any offense in the issue or in the conflict, it should disarm it. And so also, I think during the voice portion of it, it's you should really mind the yous versus I's, and kind of pay really close attention to the words that you use, because the yous and pointing the finger, that obviously is it's never well received in a point of conflict where there's point of conflict between two people. So I think that I think we should address it. People should have an idea of that, but I mean, it's oftentimes when offenses occur that's where you see fingers pointed and used, and I think you should mostly set the conversation up like, this is how it made me feel, and I don't think you should use in this conversation, but I think just something to be mindful of when you do voice these things.
Yeah, right out of the gate, it's going to be really important that your body language is calm, that you're not fired up and angry, that you're calm, that you're humble, that this isn't about you being right. This isn't about you, coming out the winner in this argument. It's about, hey, I really want to get to the bottom of this. And again, like what Jesus said, I want to win my brother back. I want to restore this relationship and not let conflict bring a wedge. So in these conversations, right out of the gate, it's important that we are that we're calm, that that our emotions are under control, that we're not operating out of anger or out of a desire to win an argument or to prove a point. But ultimately, the goal is here to restore this relationship and not allow conflict to destroy it. And so coming into that requires us to be humble, our emotions under control. And as we do that, then we can frame the conversation in such a way to where it's like, I need to get this off my chest. I'm not pointing the finger or putting the blame on you, but this is kind of how I feel, and I need to let you know. And I want to see how we can resolve this because I don't want it to happen again. And so that's where this voice part of this, to where we're actually vocalizing our perspective and we're allowing there to be opportunities to talk about that, leads to a point where while once each of you have gotten a chance to share your perspective, then it's like, okay, we take ownership and responsibility for the part we played in the conflict. And that's the O, and that's owning it. All right. We've got to own the part that we played. Anytime there's conflict, there will never be conflict, or rarely will there be conflict where both parties aren't involved, where it's just a one-sided deal. Okay. Most conflict involves both parties. And there may be times when a conflict is one-sided, but typically there's going to be a piece that I have to own in that conflict. And that looks like just saying, you know what, I realized that I could have communicated better. Or I could have probably said that in a different way that wasn't as mean, or wasn't as um, angry, or I could have controlled my emotions better in that moment. And so you verbalizing the fact that you take ownership for and responsibility for your part in that conflict, what's that going to do? That's immediately going to be like a fire hose on a fire, bringing the heat and the temperature down in that conflict, right? And
Yep.
Jesus addresses this again in Matthew chapter 7, where he's like, hey, we're not here to just judge each other. We're not here to judge each other, because when we judge each other, we're basically pointing out the speck in our brother's eye and judging them for that. What did Jesus say? He's like, you can point at the speck in your brother's eye all day, but what about the log in your own eye? And so this is that part of ownership where we're saying, yeah, you might have a speck in your eye. Yeah, there was a part that, that this thing impacted me, but I've got to really take ownership for my part in it as well. And I want to do that now. And automatically, when you get to that part of the conversation, you're going to see the temperature drop quickly. You're going to see a fire put out, because there's this like sense of receiving the ownership that you take, and that allows them to do the same thing. It's like Proverbs says, a soft answer turns away wrath. There's a when we respond humbly and we take ownership and responsibility, it changes the dynamic of that conflict real quickly. It's a diffuser, right? It will diffuse the situation. And so I think it's really important. Now, at the same time, though, we don't want to take responsibility for something that we shouldn't. I'm not trying to put to diffuse the situation by taking responsibility for something that wasn't my part. There's still a need for accountability. There's still a need for us to address the fact that when you did this, I felt this and it impacted me this way. All right. I don't want to say, when you did this, you made me feel this way. And this is something that I didn't learn until just a couple of years ago, because essentially you're giving that person control over how you feel. When you say, you made me feel, well, they can't make you feel anyway. You're in control of the way you feel. And so taking ownership is saying, hey, I've had this part to play in it, but I'm not taking ownership for anything that I honestly did not do. And I'm not giving you any control over me that you don't have. And so in that part of the conversation, I'm being careful with the language that I use. And you mentioned this earlier on, towards like, I'm not using you, I'm not pointing the finger at you, I'm not using you statements. I'm talking about me. I'm talking about myself. And so when this happened, I felt angry, and that caused me to question your dedication to the mission that we're on together, because you didn't keep your word, right? um
Mhm.
or I don't, I didn't see you working to keep your word, or how, you have to be careful on how that you use that language, because it's like you're trying to point out the conflict, how you felt and how it impacted you, without pointing the finger and blaming the other guy. And so
Mhm.
it takes some discernment, but step into it, and you're going to diffuse the situation by taking that ownership of your part in it, but not take acquiescing and taking more ownership than you should.
Yeah. No, that's really good.
Yeah,
That's
it's
really good.
important. It's tough though, because the whole self-awareness and the I statements and not pointing the finger, it's almost like learning an exercise movement, to where there's certain points where it's like you have to have things in alignment, and you have to have things in a solid position, so that you don't get injured during that movement, right? It's like when you're doing a barbell squat or something, you got to have that barbell in the right spot. You have to, when you go down, you have to bend your knees and your hips in a pat, in a systematic way, to where that bar's got a real good vertical path, and you're not going to hurt yourself by being out of alignment. Like, it takes some time to practice that movement and to get good at it. It's the same in these conversations, where it's like I'm trying to lead what I'm saying, lead the words that I'm saying in a way to where they're aligned properly, and not going to cause things to get worse before they get better. And so
Yeah.
just keep it simple and be like, I'm not going to blame you for things. I'm just going to tell you how what you did impacted me and how I
Mhm.
felt about it. But I'm not going to give you the blame, and I'm not going to tell you that you made me feel a certain way. Yeah. So that's some good coaching there on that ownership piece. And then we move on to E, the V.O.E.M.P. So you've got to vocalize or use your voice and speak. You've got to take your ownership. And then E is empathize. Um, you just gotta, you've got to really work to empathize with the person that you're walking through this process with, and begin to um, feel with them, and be able to understand, like put yourself in their shoes, right?
Yep.
I get how you could have felt like you were overlooked in that situation. I get how you could have felt like that. I get how you were offended by the fact that I said that. I can understand that, because when I put myself in your shoes, I can see why you felt that way. And so it's a matter of empathizing with someone else, and you're not, again, you're not taking ownership for anything that you didn't do, but you're just expressing the fact that I can see how you felt that way. And
Yeah.
that is another tremendous diffuser, especially with our wives. I say that because when I deal with my wife, in these situations, it's like, um, so often I'm trying to solve a problem, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of something, and I'm trying to push through something so that we can come to a conclusion and move on. And when I empathize with her, though, and I say, "Oh, you know what? I see how you could feel that way," that speaks to her emotional self, and her the emotional part of her, and it helps her know that I am concerned about the way she feels, and the way that she uh, uh, perceives things, and receives the things I say and how I act. And so I feel like that's an important part of this process too, is to be able to be empathetic and to empathize with the person that you're trying to resolve the conflict with.
Yeah.
And empathy is something to where some guys are good at it and some guys are not. Some people are wired that way and they're very empathetic, and other guys have to work at it. And so it's a matter of trying to not just prejudge the situation based upon the offense. There might have been a reason why that guy was so grumpy that day and did what he did. There might be a reason why that you don't know about, or something's going on, that you're not even seeing at work. Something's going on at home, and that caused him to act that way. And then when that comes, to the surface in the conversation, it's like, okay, I get why you were feeling that way that day. And that goes a long way to show that I value the relationship more than the offense. I value the fact that you have situations and feelings and things you're going through that I don't know about. But when I put myself in your shoes, I can see how that was a challenge for you. And so to empathize is important. And so we've got vocalize, own it, empathize, and then the important part here is that we meet. I feel like that the M is for meet, MEET, that we actually have this actual conversation, that we actually do what Jesus said to do and go to our brother and address the sin, address the conflict. And this has to be something that's face to face. It's got to be a time when we're being just absolutely honest and not trying to beat around the bush and try and make it something that it's not. But we just got to be honest and meet face to face. I don't feel like that this is something that should be done over text messages. I don't feel like it's something that should be done through anything other than face to face and maybe a video call if you're not local to each other, to where you can actually have like a FaceTime call or something. But it's got to be something where you can see that person's face and hear their voice and be able to have that conversation, look them in the eyes, and resolve that conflict. And so the meeting part is important. And then the P, the final letter there is to make a plan so that you can clarify what's the next steps here. And really, that's based upon like the question of, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? How can we avoid repeating this? What can I do differently next time? And to really work towards, hey, I'm glad we're having this conversation, and I'm glad that we're working our way through hearing each other out and owning what we need to own, and then sharing that, hey, I understand how you could feel that way. And then it's like, so in moving forward in the future, if you feel like, man, I'm not leading well, or if I'm rubbing you the wrong way, just say it. Just let me know, and that way we can avoid this conflict. And so begin to put together a plan in which you're able then to avoid this type of conflict in the future.
Yeah.
And so that model V.O.E.M.P is really, really solid, and it's helped me a lot. And just having a framework to handle these conversations with, which is important for me, to have some type of a framework that I can start with and that I can work through in the process of trying to resolve these conflicts. And
I think this is the secret sauce to being unoffendable. I know we've been talking about offense and conflict today, but I think we as men, and I don't know if we've spoken about this on this show yet, but like being unoffendable, it's like there can be an offense and we're still unoffendable. Like I feel like being offended is a state that you're stuck in, and this is us putting steps forward to not be in that offense, because I think so many of us get stuck in that state of being offended, and that's that. We're offended, and that just taints the relationship. And so I think being unoffendable doesn't mean that there's no offenses in the relationship. It's just being not stuck in that offense and staying offended and moving past it. And so I think this is just that secret sauce to get you out of that state of being offended. It's
Yeah.
having that humility and ownership, and just being able to empathize and to plan through this so that this doesn't happen again. It's like, I'm really excited to like kind of hang on to this and carry this forward into like different relationships and leadership opportunities that I have. This is some amazing stuff. So thanks
Yeah.
for sharing.
Yeah. And, I'll be honest, when I've worked through this in a real time setting, it's not formulaic like this at all. It's not like I'm going through like, oh, V.O.E.M.P. It's more of it gives me, first of all, I understand the approach. And once you start the approach, then the conversation is going to develop, and it may or may not go as you've planned it, but you've got a framework though with which you can kind of keep steering the conversation back to, and it's helped me tremendously. But it's not like I'm going through and being like, okay, you vocalize, then I'm going to vocalize. It's more of like, this is just kind of how I'm trying to to form the conversation. And then once you've done this, it gives you a framework for you to have this type of approach in the future when conflicts arise. But I found that once you kind of do this with someone, they get it. And you as that relationship grows, like you said, just the fact that you're grumpy and angry doesn't make me offended at you today. I mean, we've kind of worked our way through that, and I just am getting to know you, and I know that it's Friday morning and it's early, and we've had a long week, and you probably went to bed late on Thursday night, and and so you're just coming into work and you're just cranky, and I'm not gonna let that offend me anymore because we've already kind of dealt with that, and I've seen, it's just kind of the way that things work, we become unoffendable, and it actually becomes kind of like, okay, well, that's just Bob on a Friday morning. He's just like that, and not that Bob shouldn't try and grow past that. But at some point, though, like you said, we deal with this and we move forward. We keep the brotherhood alive, and we just become more and more unoffendable. And and so the challenge is that some of these things are really hard for men to actually even just step out and do to initiate. And I feel like that, again, that initial step of being willing to say, we need to get together and talk about this. I feel like that's kind of the crucial point, that once you do that, the floodgates are going to open, and this conversation just develops, and the heart of it is expressed. And most of the time, I would say, I don't have a percentage, I don't have a stat, but I would say in my life, most of the time, just by stepping into this conversation and meet with someone, it's helped resolve that conflict, and it's really helped that relationship level up. And so that's got to be the biggest step, is that first step of actually initiating the conversation. And so if you skip certain parts of this, though, where it's like, you're not really gonna own up to what your part in it was, and you're gonna kind of stiffen your neck and resist any type of ownership in this, and it's all the other person's fault, then the conversation isn't going to go as well. And so you've got to be sure that when you go into this conversation, that you're ready, though, to own your piece of it, that you're ready to hear the other person out and to give them the benefit of the doubt enough to be able to say, okay, share with me your perspective on this. Let me know what you were thinking and what was going on. Because that's the humbling part, right? Where we're laying down our will, we're laying down our side of the argument, and not acquiescing it, but we're just saying, I'm going to lay this down and just hear you out. And then that way I can then take ownership and then empathize and then help that fire kind of settle down to where we can manage this and get through it and get and resolve this and come to a conflict, a resolution of this conflict. So um, I feel like that there was times, especially when I was younger, that I could have really used this many times in business, many times with employees, many times with my wife. And so being able to take this and practice it and again, practice it like literally like I got to just start doing it, and you're not going to be good at it at first, but it's good for you to begin to step into that resolution of conflict, because ultimately that's what we want. We want to be men who are capable at resolving conflict, um, because we're going to see plenty of it, especially when we're men who live lives on assignment. There's going to be
Mm-hmm.
conflict. There's going to be conflict with the people around us. And so um, we want to be able to handle situations where if a teammate or a coworker undermines what we're doing or talks badly about us, or does something that hurts the mission rather than helps the mission, you got to be able to address that. You can't just sweep it under
Mm-hmm.
the rug. When a friend, you and a friend have a disagreement, and that disagreement turns into more than just a disagreement, and it actually builds an offense, we got to be able to deal with that. There's a man, it just reminded me a story of a couple of great like revivalists. It was like, man, I forget. Oh, well, I forget who they were, but there were these two great revivalists, and one of them had a certain theological position that was different than the other one. These two men were involved with these tremendous revivals in Britain and in the United States, but they had this theological difference between whether or not people were elected or not, whether or not and there was a major theological position, but they had they both had a viewpoint on the opposite side of the fence on this position. That difference in theology created a division in their relationship, and they actually that caused them to never deal with each other, and it was a big divide, and they just never communicated and never actually kept that relationship going because of that difference in theological opinion. And when one of these guys died, the other one was at his funeral, and he was asked if the other guy was going to heaven or not, because the other guy held a different theological position. And I just remember his quote impacted me, because he said something like, you know what? I think it was the guy's name was Whitfield. I forget who it was, and I don't want to lead people astray, but he said that guy, when we get to heaven, when I get to heaven, that guy will be much closer to Jesus than I am. And I regret the fact that we let a theological difference separate us and break down our relationship to where we were divided the rest of our lives. And so
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to be men who have that regret in our future. We want to be men who are able to have healthy, deep, mature relationships. And in order to do that, we have to be men who are able to resolve conflict. And so if you're offended and there's things that are going on in relationships, then we need to be able to act in that moment like Jesus asks us to respond. And so we've gotten a framework here, and so ultimately the next time that you are in a place of conflict, you have a choice. You can either respond to it with the wrong instinct, or you can actually take the right approach and you can handle it well. And oftentimes when we're just going off of instinct, that's that initial response that wants us to withdraw, to or it could be the opposite. We explode in rage and we're angry and we're upset and we say things we regret, or we could actually just act like nothing's wrong and just hide it all. And so all of those are kind of the wrong way to approach that next offense that you feel, that next conflict. And so the right approach would be for us to directly address it with humility, to say, hey, we need to talk about this. Maybe we let the emotions kind of settle down. Let's get together next week or tomorrow and discuss this. But that's the right approach, is to say we need to deal with this honestly, humbly, get to the bottom of it, and then resolve this so we can move forward. And um, man, when we don't resolve these conflicts and when we avoid them, we're actually stunting the growth in our lives and in their life. So we want to be men who are growing, who are always getting stronger and improving. And so, man, there's nothing good that comes from delaying this process and putting it away, putting it to the side, or never even addressing it. And so um, we also want to be men who don't run from hard conversations. We want to be men who are able to have hard conversations in a way that's redemptive, in a way that's restorative. And so we want to walk into those types of conversations with wisdom, like we talked about, with humility and honesty, but with a framework that we can actually allow to guide the conversation in a way to where at the end of that conversation we can come up with a plan to where let's see what we can do to not let this happen again. And you think about all of the opportunities that all of the opportunities we've had for relationships, and how many of those relationships get just basically sabotaged by conflict. And there's this concept in the Bible where Jesus says, he wants us to be peacemakers. He wants us to be men who, blessed are the peacemakers, right? And and so by being able to handle the hard conversations and to go into them with a sense of just that being a priority and that being something that's very, very important for that relationship, then we're actually stepping into that role of being a peacemaker. And there's a difference between being a peacemaker and a peacekeeper, right? A peacekeeper is going to be a guy who just basically avoids conflict, avoids tension, and will say whatever he needs to say to make sure that there's not conflict. He'll be the yes man. He'll be the nice guy. He'll be the guy who is kind of never has an opinion, never will say anything that's going to be maybe polarizing, and because he wants to keep the peace. And Jesus was never a peacekeeper. In fact, he was quite the opposite. But he wants us to be peacemakers, though. And the way that peacemakers work is that we actually engage in that place of tension. We engage in that place of conflict, but we do it redemptively. We do it in a way to where it's like we're trying to engage with this conflict in a way that helps us come to a place where truth is restored, where we're both able to be honest with each other, but we're also able to move forward, though, in a way to where I've earned my brother back and I've gained his heart. And so there's a real important aspect for us in our homes to be peacemakers, in our workplace to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers, but peacemakers. And so that means that we've got to be men who are not only able to handle conflict, but to actually intentionally pursue it and say, I've got to resolve this. And what would happen in our marriages, in our workplaces, and in our lives personally? How would we feel about ourselves differently when we pursue that and we engage with it and we see it resolved and we go forward with it? There would be none of that shame on the inside. There wouldn't be any of that feeling of cowardice. And we'd be able to boldly stand for truth and speak our minds, and be able to also do that in a way that's humble and gracious, because we know that if there's conflict from what we say, we're going to be willing to step in and resolve it. And so, all that being said, I know that there's guys out there who didn't even ever see this modeled growing up. They just knew a dad maybe who would explode and just say things that he wished that later he probably regretted. And so there was no resolution. There was just kind of like, I'm going to bring fear into the picture, and that's going to get rid of the conflict, because I'm not going to allow you to have any position other than my position. And otherwise you're going to suffer for it. And that a lot of guys are not brought up in an environment where they actually ever see conflict resolution modeled well at all. Or the guy who disengages, disconnects, and just completely um, does not deal with it at all, but just silently moves forward. And so there's all this resentment build up, which brings those wedges that we talked about in that division. And so we can be men who change that in our homes. We can be men who change that in our workplace, and the people that we work with and that we're friends with in our relationships. And I feel like that what that does in us and when the people around us, there's so much value to it. And our relationships, we need relationships that are deep, that are mature, that have gone the distance. And so this is key for that, for building that long-term relationship with the people around us. And so with that being said, do you have any like questions or any input on that, or thoughts about what we've been talking about?
No, thank you for talking about this, though. This is extremely important and something that we as men, like you said, need to exercise and practice and do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy. And I think
Yeah.
if we all stepped into this, our homes would change, our workplace would change,
Yep.
our positions at work would more than likely change. There'd be promotion, there'd be just relationships restored around us. It's like if we don't step into this, there's a lot on the table that that we're supposed to have in store that we're not going to see in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we don't step
Absolutely.
into this.
So to our listeners out there, what's one conversation you need to have this week? Is there conflict that you've not addressed that needs to be addressed? And I just encourage you right now that as we're talking about this, if there's something that comes to mind that you, once you stop listening to this podcast, that you make that call or you send that text, that you align up that meeting with whoever it is, whether it's your wife or a friend or a coworker, and you put a plan into place to address that and resolve the conflict that you've got. You will be forever grateful and changed because of that. And so that's our heart's desire, is to see men stepping into these hard conversations and resolving conflicts, because the life that comes from that is fantastic. And it's so important for us to have this tool in our work belt, to be able to see our relationships grow and mature, and to fulfill what the Bible asks us to do. The Bible, Paul in Romans basically says, man, as far as whatever you can be responsible for, live a life of peace with the people around you. He wants us to be men of peace. And so that men of peace have to address conflict in a way that leads to peace rather than division. And so let's be men of peace. Let's be peacemakers. And to live with peace in our homes, to live with peace in our friendships, separates us from the vast majority of people in this world that never know real peace, because they've never really taken the steps to resolve the conflict in their lives. And it just blows up one relationship after another, until where they don't have any deep, solid relationships. And that's what we want to be. Part of our assignment is to be men who have deep, meaningful relationships, not only with God, but with the people around us. And so to do that, we've got to be men who are skilled at resolving conflict. And so hopefully this conversation has helped you out. And as you're thinking right now, I want you to just plan on reaching out to that person that you need to reach out to, and having that conversation to resolve the conflicts that are in your life, and see what God does in you and through the other person, as you take those steps of faith, humble yourself, take the courage, and step into that conversation and practice the V.O.E.M.P model. See how it goes. Let us know. Let us know how it goes. We'd love to hear from you. Any input you've got, and so we're grateful to have you as a listener on the show. If you have not signed up for our Waypoints Dispatch, it's an email that we send out every Friday morning at 5 a.m. And it's just some guidance for your life and leadership that we send out to people who are connected with us. And so you can sign up for that dispatch on our website, which is mobilizeman.com on the homepage. And we'd love to connect with you there. And so thanks for listening today. Hopefully this topic brings some insight into your life and helps you continue to become the man that God made you to be as a kingdom asset. And so we're grateful to have you with us. And Will, thanks for your time this evening. It's been a great time. And until next week, stay on the path.